whatever one is really great today, like hopefully there's enough competition where second place is going to catch up and come out with their own differentiator. So I would take an okay system with fantastic support over a great system with crappy support. I think you have to have the support function, or you're going to have this really whiz-bang tool and it's not going to be implemented properly. Nobody's going to know how to use it, and your team's going to get frustrated.
Welcome to Season 6 of Bridge the Gap, a podcast dedicated to informing, educating, and influencing the future of housing and services for seniors. Powered by sponsors AccuShield, Align, NIC Map Vision, Procare HR, Hamilton Captel, ServiceMaster, Patriot Angels, The Bridge Group Construction, and Solinity, and produced by Solinity Marketing.
Welcome to Bridge the Gap podcast, this Senior Living podcast with Josh and Lucas. Another great episode here at the 2023 Fall NIC Conference in Chicago. We have a great friend and supporter on the show today. We want to welcome Brett Landrum, the founder and co-CEO of Procare HR. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's so good to have you back on the show. And we're so appreciative from us and from our audience to you for supporting the Bridge the Gap mission. It's a big part of how we're able to bring such great educational content to the industry. So we really appreciate your support. Today, we're going to be talking about all things HR. Labor is a big issue, recruiting, retention. There's a lot of different issues on the table. But what do you want to center on today?
How we think about managing employee scheduling and, what's the impact on, our payroll expense, what's the impact on, resident care, on employee experience, et cetera. And we kind of fell backwards into it really by accident, where 2 years ago, we were coming out of COVID and kept hearing from our customers that they've got this, this challenge where they're like, we're not reacting quickly enough to changes in census or staffing levels, et cetera. And so what's happening at the site level is we're either understaffed when we, need to be full staffed, or we're overstaffed because something changed in the census, either employee or resident, and we're just not prepared to make those adjustments. And so we're spending a lot more money on labor than what we'd like to be. Therefore, it's taking some of those dollars from investing elsewhere in the business or operating margin or so on and so forth. How do you build a structure where we can work with some of those folks that are actually doing the tactical scheduling every day, because it's a tough job? They're managing 40 to 60% of our operators' P&Ls. How do we look at the data, be able to kind of synthesize it and identify what are the causes of some of these gaps in how we schedule, how we manage, labor, and, what's the impact that has both on the P&L and then the other employee experiences?
So a lot of scalability issues up and down at the community level, but then I think also I'd like for you to speak to it, a huge advantage. We're here obviously at NIC, and we're dealing with thought leaders, big operating platforms that are scaling, sometimes dozens of communities onboarding, offboarding, mergers and acquisitions happening all the time. And labor management becomes kind of an exponential factor, because then you're not talking about one community. You may bring on 10, 12. I just talked to an operator that within the next 6 months, they'll add 11 or 12 new communities, and they only have 7 right now. So they're more than doubling in size. But labor is such a huge part of the P&L at the community level, and then that rolls up to be hugely scalable at that level. Talk to us a little bit about some of the strategies that you're seeing work to position operators for scale.
One, at its core, we had messed something up in Procare, broke some part of our business, and we were talking to our mentor and talking through the problem with him. And kind of my aha moment was, he's like, okay, so what you're telling me is this is a critical function. It's super important to your business. Yep, it is. Who wakes up every single day and that's their focus? It's kind of this person and kind of that person, and these two, they tag team on this thing and that thing. He's like, okay, so let me get this straight. Super important function. Nobody focuses on it, and nobody's accountable for it. And there's no real way to measure success. Why do you think it broke? Like, yeah, thanks. I apply that same logic to labor management, where you think about, in a big portfolio, everybody's responsible for labor, but nobody's responsible for labor because your scheduler's got a bunch of other things going on. Your EDs have a bunch of other things going on. And so it's the fire of the day. And we end up just losing discipline, where there's just not one person often, and like that example of a portfolio of 11 properties, there's not one person that wakes up every day and is like, my job on these 5 KPIs, on overtime as a percentage of payroll, on scheduled overtime as a percentage of total hours, dollars to budget, et cetera. Like, it's stuff everybody looks at and talks about, but it's not something that's like somebody's core mission and focus is to really control that. Having somebody who owns that function and it's really clear how they're measured and really clear what their metrics for success are. Like, that's one. And then second is technical and tactical things we can do to schedule better. We buy these, really cool tools, we give them to folks and we're like, hey, good luck. They don't have the skills or the techniques to actually kind of leverage that tool effectively. And so I think it's having the focused person and then really working on the reps with the folks actually responsible for doing scheduling. I'm like, hey, here's where we missed the mark on overtime or budget or whatever. Here's 2 or 3 or 4 different tactical changes we can make to really improve or enhance that particular category.
If we were looking in retrospect several years ago in our industry, we were probably tool poor, meaning there wasn't specifically designed products or software schedulers and things like that really understood senior living and was designed specifically for it. I would say, while we could always improve today, we could probably walk and probably find a dozen different schedulers just here. But to your point, somebody that is actually understanding that and is the champion of that. And that leads me to, so many right now, you have your traditional, very large groups that manage a lot of assets. They have a lot of infrastructure, a lot of bandwidth to be able to have infrastructure. But a lot of the folks that we're talking with here, even at NIC, they're relatively small. And it's really hard to be able to dedicate someone on your payroll at the management level, the corporate level, to be able to focus on that, much less at the community level where you're just trying to staff caregivers a lot of time. So what would be some strategies that you would say would help companies to be able to scale and have someone to be able to do that and be able to dedicate some resources to that without sinking the ship on the payroll?
Yeah, totally. It's a little chicken and egg, right? Because it's like, I believe there's 4 to 6% in almost every senior living organization of payroll that can be captured. Some organizations it's more, some it's less. That's a huge number. And particularly when you're talking about a number of maybe even 3, 4, 5 buildings, like that really adds up quick. The return for an investment like that is there if you have confidence in the execution plan. You can say, okay, here's the categories of kind of payroll expense we're going to impact. Here's the levers we're going to pull. If we do that and we're conservative in our estimations, like what do we think that produces? And then what's the level of person we need to do that work and focus on it, et cetera. I think the math makes sense. It's just most people where the breakdown comes is, confidence of the execution plan to be able to make that type of investment.
Sure.
I personally think senior living has done a really fantastic job of trying to adopt technology and being open and willing and driving towards adoption, where I see it break down breadth and depth use within the organization. Like the executives get it, they know why they want the technology, but then usually it's at the site and the community level where the people who need to use those tools just aren't comfortable with them. They're not quite optimized, actually utilizing a really high caliber tool.
Sure. So in your organization, put you on the spot a little bit. I know it's sometimes hard to talk about yourself. With what you guys do at Procare, how do you come alongside specifically in this genre, manage the whole HR stack, but also to help them navigate potentially what tools are going to work right? It's very easy to fall victim and prey to flashy bells and whistles, and you're like, oh my gosh, but then the implementation of that, it can be way more difficult and more than what they thought they were going to have to tackle.
I'm obviously a proponent of outsourcing, and one of the biggest advantages you get with an HR partner is their trial and error, their intellectual property, their reps. They have so many at-bats with a particular tool or type of tool that hopefully the tool they've selected, in our case, takes scheduling. I've used 5 different schedulers with customers over the last 5 years. That's been incredibly painful for our organization to go through the testing, the iteration, and the failures. But we have so much resources and money and time and energy into finding the right tool, figuring out how do you deploy it, how do you train on it, having a good, clean implementation where hopefully we expect to do a lot of the heavy lifting. The ongoing labor management is really about us doing the analysis, working just as any executive on your team would, with all the different levels and stakeholders in your organization to impact the change and outcomes we're driving towards. We've got, a 3-person team. One person does all the tech configuration, implementation, et cetera. Other person's really heavy in training and data. And then the third is somebody who's been in operations, has ran a small portfolio of buildings, who's really focused on taking the analysis of what's driving the labor costs and saying, okay, what do we need to now do with this information to impact the change we want? They work directly on a daily and weekly and monthly basis with the individual leaders and schedulers of those sites to work on those tactical changes. Let's take the area with the greatest impact, and let's really work on that thing. Let's grind on it for a period of time. Let's get it to where we feel like we're 90% of the way there, and then let's move to the next piece of low-hanging fruit.
Unlike you, I've not had the advantage or disadvantage, whatever you want to call it, of going and vetting 5 different systems, for example, like you gave that example, from just a provider without having gone through and tried and errored them all. When I just look from the outside looking in, I don't see a whole huge level of differentiators between some of these systems, right? I'm wondering, what do you see as like some of the things to look for that could be major differentiators? Or do you say this is pretty competitive and you just have to make the product you choose work, or the tools that you choose work? Or is it really about asking the right questions that some of these tools are going to be better for your organization than others?
I do think some of them will be better. Whatever one is really great today, hopefully there's enough competition where second place is going to catch up and come out with their own differentiator. So I would take an okay system with fantastic support over a great system with crappy support. I think you have to have the support function, or you're going to have this really whiz-bang tool and it's not going to be implemented properly. Nobody's going to know how to use it, and your team's going to get frustrated. One thing that we've learned the hard way is we've bought some really sophisticated tools that proclaim to be able to do incredible things, and I think they could. But it's like giving your 16-year-old kid a Ferrari in the middle of downtown Minneapolis with 2 feet of snow. They're not going to move. They don't know how to drive and whatever. One of the core things that we've learned the hard way is when we're deploying a tool, we've got to be really, really cognizant of how easy it is to just pick up the bike and go ride. And if it's really hard, they're going to get discouraged and you won't get the depth of use that you need in order for the tool to be effective. So I think really looking at how is the tool designed, what are the actual workflows and steps that employee is going to go through to use the tool, and hopefully the steps are minimized. The second thing that we're seeing now more than ever with staffing where it's at is having a really robust communication feature built into a scheduling system, I think is critical. Employees expect to be able to communicate omni-channel today. Hey, I want to be able to text and have that go to the scheduler. I want to be able to get text from the scheduler. I want to be able to do an email. I want to be able to just go in through the app and talk to people. So having a robust communication tool, I think, is really helpful. Everybody should be using the scheduler every day. So having that communication feature built in is also, I think, just a great way to disseminate information. Personally, I think being able to get live access to the data and the reports. A lot of folks, it's hey, I know how we did on labor versus I know how we're going to do on labor based upon what we've scheduled thus far.
Yeah, 2 things, right?
And it kind of goes back to proving the point of what you said earlier, of having a champion that's dedicated to running, and they wake up and they think about that every day, because if you're having that much engagement and feedback and all of that, you obviously have to have somebody on the other end it's reciprocal, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. Lucas, great conversation as always with Brett.
Always very good information. And I know our audience are thinking, this is good information. I need some help with this. And the way you do that is connect with Procare HR and Brett's team. They're going to walk you through this. So Brett, thank you so much for spending your busy schedule time with us here at the NIC Conference on the podcast.
Absolutely. Appreciate you guys having me.
And for our listeners, if you want to download this episode and connect with us on social and so much more content, btgvoice.com is the place to go. Check us out on LinkedIn, and thanks for listening to another great episode of Bridge the Gap.
Thanks for listening to Bridge the Gap podcast with Josh and Lucas. Connect with the BTG Network team and use your voice to influence the industry by connecting with us at btgvoice.com.